How many of you guys are on the latest, greatest software? Your OS. How many of you are like, okay, there's a new OS out and I'm going to upgrade right now? You should never raise your hand and admit that you've done that. Worst mistake you can possibly make. If you've bought, no, and that's true. If you've bought a new laptop, you have no choice because you can't downgrade. I've actually tried. I've bought new laptops and tried to downgrade. The laptop that it ships with, it will be the minimum one that it'll ever be able to take. So if Apple or Windows has forced that on you, I'm so sorry. But I'm just telling you right now, you are a beta tester for Apple or for Windows. That's exactly what you are. And shit is going to go south and wrong and bad, and it's just how life is. Did you get on?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, that's promising somewhat. We'll probably take another break, but I want to make sure that this isn't a problem. So you and I'll talk, okay? Anyway, for me, I'm 2 systems behind. That's typically where I stay, at least 2 systems behind. And that way I know when I actually upgrade to a system that's 2 behind, whatever, every bug that can be worked out has been worked out. And everything basically will be working. It should be supporting. Again, the problem that I run into is that Adobe will actually do something new that requires me to update software, my OS, to support it. And that's pretty much when I upgrade. Other than that, if your shit works, why are you fucking with it? You are only asking yourself for problems, and the worst thing you can possibly do is the worst thing you can do is upgrade during the day of a shoot. The second worst is do it the night before, because then you're just scrambling, and it's just, no, do not do this. If your stuff works, don't fuck with it. Please. Yes. That's okay. I haven't still painted this. You and I will take a look at this later. So when we do the whatever, we'll see what's going on in here. Okay, don't finish that. Okay. But you got the class. That's really the important part, right? Okay. All right, I need everybody to open up Photoshop. I know, right? We're only... Yeah. Yeah. Does that mean I need to download Photoshop? No. Through the school computers. If you go down to the very bottom, your doc should show up, and there should be an icon on there that has Photoshop on it. Or you can do a search for it, hit Command F, I think. Is that what brings up Spotlight? And you can do a search for it, or go to your application folder. Did everybody get into Photoshop? Okay, you guys were like the threes people were telling me, I'm a 3-4. Can't get Photoshop. Okay, you will notice if you take a look at my screen, it probably looks very different than yours. This is a custom workspace that I use for retouching. It's one we're going to build in just a minute so that you actually have it. You do not have to use my workspace, but I can tell you this, after years and years of doing a lot of retouching, whatever, this is the space that you want to be in because it gives you everything that you need without having to work too hard at it. However, That being said, we need to set up preferences in Photoshop first, and we need to have conversation about what's really going on there. So to get to preferences, if you're on a Macintosh, you come up to the Photoshop name up at the very top left hand, click on it and come down to preferences. You'll get a flyout menu, come across to general, and then we'll go through these pretty much one at a time. If you're on Windows system, it's actually in the edit menu. You go to edit and it's down at the bottom of your it's down at the bottom of that menu, and again it will just be listed as preferences there. But I need everybody in and actually with this preference space visible. Is anybody, so this is the point that I was talking about earlier. Instead of me asking you every time, is everybody here? Has everybody got the screen? Whatever. I'm just going to go on assuming that everybody's gotten here. If you have missed something, you're not here, you don't have this step, it's not working for you, whatever, this would be the time to stop me and say, Verser, I'm not at that screen, I can't find it. Okay, so, yep. So on a Macintosh, you're up to click on the word Photoshop, top left-hand corner, come down to Preferences, you'll get out a flyout menu, come across to General, and this is where we'll start. Oh, sorry, if you're on a brand new Mac, they've renamed it, instead of calling it Preferences, they now call it Settings. Uh-huh. All right, we good? Okay, I'm going to go through and have a conversation with you about certain things here, about how I like to set my computer up and the reasons why I do it. You do not have to do a lot of the same things that I do. I'm going to argue why I think that you should do this, but then ultimately how you choose to do this is entirely up to you. Make sense? Okay, so first things up here at the very top under the general part, the first thing that I hate is the home screen. I hate it. So it's a storefront for Adobe to sell you shit. So I uncheck this auto show the home screen. It's the thing that opens up and all of a sudden it takes you to a place and you have no idea how to do anything, whatever. I hate that part, so I get rid of that. I also do check the Use Legacy New Document Interface. It's much more intuitive than the new version that Photoshop has done. There's a world of preferences that exist in here about how people can undo all the improvements that Photoshop has made. For instance, I can hit Command, I can actually copy something to a clipboard and do Command N to get up the new dialog box, and it will offer to give me the resolution and sizing of the clipboard. Try that on your new fucking interface. Yeah, it's horrible. Anyway, that's for me. Use Legacy Free Transform. This is critical for us to do. So what this has to do is how the transform tool actually works, specifically giving you the anchor point that sits in the center. When we get into doing compositing, we want to be able to transform in perspective, and you can't do it unless you use the Legacy Transform version. Most of you will not notice a difference in this, depending on how much transforming you really do. Beep when I'm done. You run some giant filter on a 2 gigabyte file. It can take 5 minutes to do it. Beep when done actually lets me know that something's done. I can go, I can go, take a walk or whatever. Anyway, it just lets you know when it's done. Export clipboard. It is horrible. It is the worst memory hog in the world. You copy a layer in Photoshop that's 500 megabytes, that takes up 500 megabytes of memory that your computer has got to manage. Nobody uses the clipboard in Photoshop for anything, ever. No reason to have this checked. Again, talking about freeing up memory, keeping your machine faster. The rest of this can stay at its defaults. Go to the left side now of your preferences, down to the next one, interface. There are people who will use different interfaces. How many of you guys right now have a cute picture of your cat on your desktop as your screensaver or as your screen desktop, right? Horrible. Everything that happens that's surrounding your screen has an impact on your perception. So if you've got some bright red background, believe me, that bright red, if you can see it, will have an impact on your image. If you click on this white and you do that, this is going to have an impact on your perception of the tonal range of your image and the color both. So I tend to keep mine very dark, not black, because it gets to be really hard to read text on there. This is pretty much the default. It's what I suggest that you do. The rest of these you can leave at their defaults. Go to the next one down, Workspace. In Workspace, there's two things that I get rid of, and I hate the way they work. Open Documents as tabs is on by default. I uncheck that. And Enable Floating Document Window Docking, I also uncheck that. I hate tabbed behavior in Photoshop for one specific reason. I love it in a browser. That's great. But in Photoshop, especially when you're doing compositing and you've got 3 or 4 images open and you are trying to drag elements from one image to another image, and you have to remember what tab it is you need to drag that to, it's a nightmare. So for me, I don't want tabbed behavior to actually happen in Photoshop. So I uncheck these again. It's a personal preference. If you want to keep it, that's fine. But things can start to get confusing when we get more than one image open in when we're doing our compositing work. Next one down, Tools. So for those of you who are just starting in Photoshop, the Show Rich Tool Tips is a great thing. It's the little videos that run whenever you hover over a tool. For me, it's a pain in the ass. It covers up shit that I don't want, and I'm not ever going to look at that little video. If I can't figure something out, I'm going to go read about it on Photoshop's, on Adobe's website. I'm not going to watch the little baby video on it. This is, this is like training wheels. So I uncheck that part. The rest of this.
How about overscroll?
You know, if you like overscroll, go for it. I don't even know what overscroll is, so I don't really worry about it. Anyway, I would leave that all at the rest of the of its defaults right here. That's what I would do. History. This thing matters. Most people don't use history, so I'm going to tell you why you might consider using history. So, not that you guys have made this decision, but would anybody in this room consider being a professional retoucher? Okay, so there's enough of you that actually might say, okay, yeah, that would be actually worth doing, right? You might consider actually doing that part of it. This is where history comes in for you guys, because here's the problem with history. You get hired to do a retouching job, and let's say it's one single image, but it's high-end beauty retouch, whatever, and you say $2,000, and they say fine, and you do exactly what they tell you to do, and then you give them the image, and they say, I love it, but this isn't worth $2,000. What'd you do? And you say, well, I did everything that you told me to do, and they say, well, I still don't think that's worth $2,000. And then you're in this pissing match and this fight, whatever, and there's, right? So, for the people who are serious about doing that kind of stuff, what you do instead, before you even start work on this, is that you enable history by clicking on the history log. You can put history in 2 different places. You can actually embed it in the metadata. I don't suggest you do that. It'll make your file, it doesn't make your file giant because it's a text file. But nonetheless, what I really suggest you do is you keep it as a text file. And when you do this, you actually click on Choose. So select text file, and then you name this file what? What? No. You name this, because again, it's a text file. You name this the name of your image that you've been really good about, your 20230123 or 24 for today, underscore CCC, underscore keyword, whatever. You name it that name so that you know that it's the text, the history of the work that you did on that particular image. Again, this whole thing about file naming keeps your work connected. Yes,
So
shoot.
for every new image we edit, we have to
Yes,
edit it.
exactly. A separate one for every image. There's a reason behind this. Does that make sense? I'm going to hit cancel here because I'm not going to keep this on, but that's where I would put it. You can do both. So this basically just means you would get a text file and it would go embed the metadata into the file that you're working on. But this is where it gets the best. You've got 3 options for what you name. Sessions only basically records. So what it does is it's going to record when you open the file and when you closed it. That's all it does. That's worthless to you. You can go to the next one down, concise. And what concise will do is that not only when you open and closed it, but it'll actually general things that you do. I added a layer. I added a curve. I mean, it will record that, right? But where the people who are professional retouchers care is the detailed version of this. When you do detailed version of this, it records everything. And I mean everything. If you've got a brush, stroke 1, stroke 2, stroke 3, stroke 4, everything, you will find that when you do a serious retouching job that you end up with a file that's 500-600 pages. And you print that 500 or 600 pages out and you walk in with the phone book size thing and the guy says, I don't think this is worth $2,000. What did you do? And you throw that in his lap and say, this is what I did, fucker, give me my money. It's exhaustive. It's the best trick that you will ever know. Yes. It does not timestamp other than the open and closing. It will open, it'll stamp that, but no, it does. It won't say, so if you like pause for like an hour and don't do anything, it doesn't say paused for an hour and didn't do anything. But yeah, but telling you, it takes up no room on your computer at all. So for me, I'm not going to keep this on because this will record everything that we do. File handling, the next one on here, I pretty much leave this now at its defaults with one very important exception, and it's this one right here. I think by default, correct me if I'm wrong, automatically save recovery information is not enabled. You want to enable this. What this will do, and then in your drop down menu you want to say every 10 minutes. If you're a really paranoid person, you can do it every 5 minutes. But what it will do is that in the event of a crash, this will save a recovery file for you. And all of a sudden when you open up Photoshop again, it will actually open the file up. So if something horrible happens, you can actually recover from it. The most that you will lose is 10 minutes of your work. Why this isn't enabled all the time, I have no idea, or why it isn't part of the default. But there's a lot of defaults in here that make no sense. Does this make sense to everyone? Of all the things that we go through today in here, this is actually one of the most important ones. So anyway. It's a text file, and hopefully you'll put it in right next to the file that you worked on that you're keeping in your library and sits right there next to it because it has the same name. That's where I put it. All of it stays together. So wherever your working file is. Yes.
At the end of class, you show a demonstration like how can you just retrieve all of the steps we do. Because it happens to me very often. Like look for actually all this in your class.
Right.
It's on the
Yeah.
video.
Okay, next one down. Export. I leave this at its defaults. I don't actually use quick export a lot. I do export, and we can look at this later on, to actually do JPEGs, to build JPEGs for websites. That's primarily why I do exports for files here. But I go through a completely different process. So I will do a quick export for a JPEG if I'm looking for just like a screenshot or I want something like that, whatever. I don't really care about it. So I don't really change anything in here. If you want to, you can, but I will show you later on how I actually go through a more controlled process to export files, because this is about quick export largely. Performance, this one matters. So in performance, the standard is Photoshop actually uses 70% of the RAM inside of your computer and devotes it to Photoshop. The reason it doesn't do more, the reason it doesn't use 100% is that your computer actually needs, the Macintosh itself or the Windows machine itself, it needs some of that memory just to run itself. So just to run the OS and to do anything else, it needs some of that. So this 70% was the default that Photoshop actually set. And that works great for people who have machines that have 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of memory in it. But there's people now who've got 64 gigabytes of memory, people who've got 128 gigabytes of memory. If you've got a machine that's got a whole lot of memory, you can actually crank this thing up. You can't go all the way to 100 because you can't rob. Your computer still needs memory. But your computer realistically doesn't probably need more than 4, 5, 6 gigabytes top memory to actually do all the other shit that you're doing. So you can crank this up to the point that, and you'll see the number that's right up in here, that where you actually leave, say 6 gigabytes of memory for all the other shit and then devote the rest of it to Photoshop, it will speed up your work dramatically. So now I'm going to tell you the thing nobody in here wants to hear. How many of you guys have a browser open in your computer when you are working in Photoshop? Yeah, I do too. I listen to music, all that kind of stuff, right? And how many of you use Chrome? Yeah, makes it even worse. All browsers, doesn't matter who it is, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Microsoft Edge, it doesn't matter what, they are gigantic memory hogs, and they rob memory from what Photoshop can actually use, and it slows your Photoshop down. You want the leanest, meanest machine? Get something else to play music. Shut your browser, shut everything you can possibly shut down and still have Photoshop run. Do not keep Lightroom open. If you've done your import or you're dragging over your work into Photoshop, quit Lightroom and your Photoshop will be screamingly faster. But browsers are the biggest. They're the biggest hogs of all. But I know people who have 30 applications open while they're trying to work in Photoshop. Do not do that. Yes?
This may be a little too freaky at this point. So, like I said, I do most of my stuff in Lightroom.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I want to add something with its face or whatever. So I will open Photoshop for that, keep it open, do the thing, and when I save it, it automatically saves back in the Lightroom.
It does.
So if I'm not using Photoshop, and then I close it out, it's not processing anything, is it okay to just have it open and sort of...
Yeah, and what you're really talking about, though, is not intensive editing in Photoshop. What I'm really talking about here is production scale editing in Photoshop. That's what I'm really looking at here. So, you know, if you're, again, we were talking earlier about monitor calibration. You don't need monitor calibration to do a ton of things in Photoshop. If you're adding type in Photoshop, you do not need a calibrated monitor to do that. You need a calibrated monitor to do color and to do tone and those sorts of things, contrast. You need it for that. So there are going to be instances where I think what I'm describing to you guys may be overkill, but what I'm looking at here is professional level, industrial scale retouching work in Photoshop. That's what I'm talking about here. Does that mean that you can't have a browser open because you want to actually go in and look at a file in Lightroom or look at a file in Photoshop? Of course you can. I mean, that doesn't matter, but that's not where this really applies, is that when you're really doing the heavy lifting in a big file, you need all the resources that you can get. Good on that part? Okay. The history states, this part will go on before we get to that. Let's go over here to graphic processor first. So in the use graphic processor, you do want to enable that. However, there are computers, especially older ones, that have graphic processors that can be wonky. It's not that they're not supported in Photoshop, but they can be glitchy. So this may be more advanced for a lot of you, but in this, the classic that you'll see this show up in is that when you go into Liquify, all of a sudden you'll start seeing black and white squares of your image that have literally disappeared. Just really weird random anomaly shit that starts to happen. That is an issue of this right here. It is an overtaxing of the processor and it can't handle it. And so you get this weird shit and it stays in your file. So it's not like, oh, well, it just appears bad. It isn't. You've got to actually deal with that. So if stuff like that starts to happen, you come into here and you temporarily turn this use graphic processor off. The reason you don't want to do that if you don't have to is that everything in Photoshop is graphics. And graphics processors are basically the things that run your monitor, the things that drive your monitor. They're really good at doing graphics, whereas the general processor in your computer has to do everything. And so Photoshop over the years has increasingly gone to offloading the work onto the graphics processor because it's so much better and faster at doing graphics. So you don't want to just turn this thing off. Make sense? All right. History states, I leave this at 50. You can extend it more, but extending it more starts to rob your computer of RAM, which actually has an impact on Photoshop all in its entirety. So I leave this at its defaults, and we'll talk about how we deal with other parts of this later. Image processing, this is actually a new one for me. So this is where you can actually do things like change preferences in the UI of Photoshop. So for instance, for me, if you use select subject, and we will look at select subject, there's two versions of it. One actually uses the processor on your computer to do the work. The other actually uploads your file to the servers at Adobe and they do the processing up there. A lot of people claim that the cloud version is the better version because it's Adobe throwing all of their weight at it. But that's not necessarily true. Sometimes the one on your computer actually does a better job. So, but what do you want to be the default? So for me, I've found that more often than not, selecting the cloud version of it is actually makes a better selection. And so that's the one I want to be the default. And that's what the selection is right here. You can select it and change it. The default is the quicker device version, but I use this. If you are in a place where you cannot get online, then you don't want to use this because again, if you can't get online, then you can't get your image up to Adobe's servers. Make sense? So anyway, that's I just changed this part right here. The rest of this I'll leave it its default. Scratch disking, this becomes important. How many people of you have ever had the dreaded scratch disk is full? It should actually add right after that, and you're fucked because you can't do anything, right? How many people in here have any idea what a scratch disk is? Okay, here. You might hear me yell this. I'm going to go back on the whiteboard and work right now, so pay attention to this part. This may be very hard to hear on the recording because I'm not near this microphone, and that'll happen a couple of times, but you guys are all smart, so you'll know and you'll understand on this. Now what I'm trying to do is all the confidence in one of these dry erase markers. All right, so this is my 1 terabyte hard drive, and I've got a 1 gigabyte image on it, and I want to edit this image. So this hard drive is connected to my computer, and you get where this is going right now. So I've got a computer. This is actually an old Mac Plus. I've always done computers. It's a little scheme, but anyway, it's making sense in my little illustration here. I feel like it needs context because I don't know that, right? And so I'm going to keep this really low just to get to this point much faster, but I'm going to say that this computer has got 4 gigabytes of RAM in it. Right? So nobody works with that anymore, but nonetheless, just again, bear with me here. It just makes it faster. Okay? So I'm going to do 4 gigabytes of memory in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So I got 4 gigabytes of memory here. So what happens is I launch my Photoshop file. And Photoshop file is sitting on this hard drive. It's little bits of data. So Photoshop reads that data and it actually writes it in. So not confused anymore. What happens is that Photoshop writes this into the first gigabyte state right here. And it sits there. And so now what's happening is that it's read the information off my hard drive, whether that's a physical hard drive that spins or SSD or whatever it is, underground, whatever it is. It puts it into here, and now it's actually sitting in RAM, which is electronic. What happens with all Photoshop does is it goes in and it changes those ones and zeros. So any change that you make, it simply makes those changes in RAM, and then when you're happy with what you've got, you save it back out to your hard drive. And the new order of ones and zeros is your updated file. Does that make sense, everybody? Happy for this part? Okay, but now we need to talk about what scratch disking is about and what really happens. So, back to my scenario again. I brought it in Photoshop, and now I make a change. I duplicate a layer, I double a layer. So what happens is that this is my state number 1 right here. What happens is that Photoshop then actually writes state number 1 down here, and this is now state number 2 at the top. And the reason they do this is that this gives me history. This allows me to go back. It allows me to undo. If I Command Z, I just undo that. So I duplicated my layer. I hit Command Z, it will actually undo that duplication. and I can go back and forth and back and forth. And it's all enabled by this, and it's really fast. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? So then I add a curve to this. So now I've started my file, I duplicated the layer, now I'm going to add a curve. That's a third state. I have 50 history states that we set up. I've got 50 of these to work with. So 1 goes here, 2 goes here, and 3 goes here. So 1 is the file's open, 2 is I've duplicated the layer, 3 is I've now got a curve on top of the duplicated layer of the file that open. Does that make sense, everybody, what's happening here? And this all works great until, so I do one more change, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, but now what happens? I've maxed it out. So what happens now, I've got 4 states here, and I can go back to any of them in history, and it happens really fast. So what happens now is that I don't have any more RAM. I can't keep doing this, but I've set up 50 states. I want multiple of these. I want this to be able to go on. 50 is a good number, but does that make sense? So what Photoshop does is it actually takes history state number 1 and it writes it back to the computer in a temporary, this would be a temp, invisible file. It's really not a file, it's a partition. So what Photoshop does is that it puts 1 here, this is now state number 1, then 2 goes here, 3 is here, 4 is here, 5 is here. I've still got 5 history states, but one of them has been relocated back onto my hard drive in an invisible partition that you can't see. You'll never see that file, it's always invisible. However, if you set up a place to say how much of each history, you can look on any computer, there's settings that you can, or windows where you can open and say, how much available free space do I have? You can watch your free space start getting knocked down as this goes on. So this process continues to happen for 50 states. So when I get to my 50th state, this would be 50, this would be 49, this would be 48, this would be 47, but I've got 46 files on this in this invisible partition. That's 46 gigabytes that I've actually got back in here. And if you don't have the room on your computer to actually hold this, you get the dreaded scratch disk error because your hard drive is now full. You don't know, you haven't saved anything, you didn't think you did anything, but it is now full. This invisible partition has grown to hold all of those states. Does that make sense? Everybody what's going on here? So that becomes a problem for us. Because now your hard drive is full, you can't do anything else in Photoshop. You get the dreaded, your scratch disk is full. You can't save your file because your hard disk is full. That's why you can't do anything with it. Your only hope at that is to try to clear your history and then pray. But more often than not, you're just out. Does that make sense? What's going on here? So this invisible partition here is called a scratch disk. And you can actually assign, you can see by default, in my case, I've actually got 3 partitions of my hard drive on my computer. But nonetheless, if you take a look first, unless you've got a hard drive attached, you'll just see this. If you do have a hard drive attached, I'm going to attach the hard drive.
It's always fledgling.
Yeah. So by default, when you launch Photoshop, it takes your startup drive, called your boot drive, whatever, and it actually labels, it becomes your scratch disk. But, hang on one second, don't cancel out of yours. I just need to get my hard drive to mount and then relaunch this. In this case now, you'll see that my additional external hard drive has been added right here. To enable it to actually work as a scratch disk, you have to click on it. Then if you want it to be, what's going to happen now is that it will use your boot drive, in my case my Macintosh HD, it will use that till it fills up. And then it will actually go to my external hard drive and it'll start working there. But some people prefer to have all their scratch disks always on an external hard drive, never on their boot drive here, because they haven't kept enough room on their boot drive. So if that's what you wanted to do, you would uncheck your boot drive, you would take your external hard drive and you would elevate it in terms of its importance. And now Photoshop will only use my external hard drive to actually be my scratch disk part, and you avoid running into that problem. I don't suggest you do this. The problem with this is that your scratch disk, when you're dealing with history states, it all has to do with the speed going back and forth of your hard drive. How fast is your hard drive? So if you call up a state that's sitting on your scratch disk and you say, oh yeah, I want to go back to state number 13, it's got to read that information. It's got to read that full file off of your hard drive, and that takes time. It's not like as fast as if it's in RAM. Make sense? So I don't prefer to actually do it this way. The fastest hard drive on your computer is always going to be your boot drive, period. You can't get any faster. And that's what you want. But the problem that pretty much everybody in this class, I'm going to say without exception here, is that you have too much shit on your computer. You need free space to become a scratch disk. How much free space do you need? Minimum, this is just for computer health, minimum 10% of your computer. What does that mean? If you've got a 1 terabyte hard drive, internal hard drive in your computer, you need 100 gigabytes of free space. How do you know how much free space that you've got? Well, in the Macintosh world, I'm sorry I can't do this for Windows because I don't know how to do this in Windows, but I'm sure there's a way that you can find out how much free space do you have on your hard drive. In the Macintosh world, if you come up to, I'm just going to go to the Finder really quickly and hide everybody else. If you click on your hard drive and say Command I to get info, it will tell you what your capacity is and what the available space is. In mine, I've got a capacity of 1 terabyte. 10% of that would be 100 gigabytes. Again, a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. So 10% of that would be 100 gigabytes. I've got over 200 on mine. You do this on yours. Most of you guys, when you bought your computers, thought, well, that 250 gigabyte hard drive will be plenty. I tell people this all the time. You need a bigger hard drive inside your computer more than you need that extra 32 gigabytes of memory. The 32 gigabytes of memory is show. The processors are show. You need storage. But if you do this, most of you will, again, have a 250 or 500 gigabyte hard drive on the inside. And if you do the math, 10% of that, and look at what you have free, I would bet the bank more people in this room do fall under that 10% threshold than over it. And it's crippling you. You've got to get your shit off your computer. The things to look for, video files, they're the worst. Second thing to look for are image files. You've got all those pictures that you shot 15 years ago that you are never going to use. You're never going to look at them again. Get rid of that shit. You got the movies from mom and dad's that, Super 8 that you digitized. Get it off. I'm not saying throw it away. Archive it on an external hard drive, but get it off your computer. Your computer will start to scream. In a good way. Okay. So back into this. Last thing about this. When you make these changes, you have to restart Photoshop for this to take effect. If I actually just go back and start working in Photoshop right now, none of this has changed. So right now, it would actually still be my boot drive. It doesn't even know that I got my other hard drive connected. So I'm going to go back to where I was and move on. Next one, cursors. This is important. In cursors, you want to actually use the normal brush tip. Some people think that it's supposed to use full size. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't, yes. Yes. Okay, in cursors, you want to make sure that you have a normal brush tip. And the reason you want to do this is some people think, oh, I want to do the full-size brush tip. The problem with the full-size brush tip is that actually the line that you see around it shows you if you're using a soft brush, as you go to the edges of your soft brush, the image starts to disappear to the point where you really can't see. Your brush will encompass that entire thing, and intuitively when you try to work with it, your brush will seem way too small. So using a normal brush tip sort of gives you more of an average of that experience, and it will seem more precise to you. So you definitely want to use that. You also want to crosshair your brush tip for all of your tools. So because when you're doing very specific clone work, you want to be able to take a clone from a damn near 1 pixel and drop it on another pixel, not just a general, but be really precise. That crosshair in the middle will actually give you that precision. I use it for everything. You want to do that, make sure. Cursors. I don't know why I don't know why Adobe thinks that the little paint bucket is cute, or the little paintbrush that looks like a paintbrush, or the little cropper tools that look like That's bullshit. There's no precision in that at all. You want precise for all of your tools. You want your clone stamp tool to be this round thing with a square, with a crosshair in the middle of it. That's what you want for this thing. You don't want to be going all the lasso that looks like a little rope. No. That's the way this is finally set up. Transparency and gamut. By default, Photoshop sends this with a gamut warning. There's a middle gray that is worthless to us. So what gamut is that you've got color that you can see on this is an example of gamut. Color that you could see on a screen that you would not be able to print on a printer. You can actually set Photoshop up to show you which colors can be and which colors cannot be printed to a specific printer. However, that grayscale does not show up well enough for you to really be able to see it. So you want to change this. If you click on the color, and I will give you this number, we will talk about this all the time. I will give you RGB figures. If you click on the top R value, so I've just clicked on the value to enter. This is the color picker. We'll talk about it quite a bit. Tip on the R value, no matter what color it is right now, type in a 0. If you hit your tab key, it will advance you to the next thing, so you don't have to keep selecting these guys. Type in 255 for the green, tab key, and 0 for the blue. This gives you a pure green. Say okay to that. This you will be able to see on anything except for an image that's got this pure green on it. Make sense? It could be. Units and rulers. So this is really esoteric, but for those of you who really care about this shit, you could possibly change this. This has always been set up to give you a screen resolution based on 72 pixels per inch. There hasn't been a monitor or a laptop that's been produced that uses 72 pixels per square inch in 15 years. It refers to old CRT monitors, cathode ray tube monitors. That's what this actually refers to. If you want to know the real resolution of your computer and actually enter in a value here to give you more of a realistic representation when you're looking at zoom levels and that kind of thing in Photoshop, the way you figure out your real screen measure, I'm going to do it for my computer right here, and then you'll figure out how to do this on your own. First off, you need to know the resolution of your computer. So for me, if I come up to my system preferences, now called system settings, and click on displays, it's going to give me 2 of these. One of them is going to be for, this always happens to me. Because I'm hooked up to a projector, it's giving me the resolution of this as well as the projector, and I don't want, go to my display settings, and I'm going to do my internal monitor right here, and then you want to hit scaled to come up. So right now my computer is set up so yours is screen settings, displays, then I'm going to click on my display setting. Sorry guys, this always screws up when I click on something like this. I'm going to do my internal one right here. My scaled setting, though, it doesn't actually give me a scaled setting. I'll show all of my resolutions. Where are you? This is great. It won't pick up what mine is. I'm going to unplug this projector for 1 second and tell you what value I get out of this. And then I'll plug it back in. So on my default setting, actually on my default setting, I'm going to plug this back in. I might keep this, I might not. We'll try. Don't have to tell me. It's got it right here. So you can see right here, oh, well, it just went away. But nonetheless, it gave me my display as 1,440 pixels by 900 pixels. That is width by height. So it tells me that the width of my monitor on my laptop right here is 1,440 pixels wide. Then you take a tape measure and you measure the width of your screen and you divide one by the other. My screen is about 11 inches wide, so if I do the math on it really quickly, let me get out of here before I screw this up. If I do the math really fast, and I take 1,440 and I divide it by 11, it gives me 130, basically 131. That is the screen resolution that I am looking at right now, is 130 pixels per inch for my setup, not yours. This will be different on a big monitor, on a different size laptop. Nonetheless, you take this value and enter it into your screen resolution here. And then what happens is that if you use things, for instance, if you've got an image set at 100% and you use a ruler in Photoshop, it will then actually show you 1 inch on your screen. Now that typically doesn't happen, but it will if you actually set this up to correspond to this to be exact. So you actually get the real pixel dimension of the real true pixel width of your screen based on your resolution. Okay, so you take the 1512 and then you actually measure the width of your screen. You need a tape measure to do it, right? And you divide that tape, so let's say it's 12 inches, you would divide that number by 12. If it's, let's say it's 10 inches, you divide it by 10. So it's the real number of inches. How many pixels are, okay, in my case, 1,440 pixels was the entire width. If my screen is 10 inches, that means I divide 10 into 1440 and I end up with 144 pixels per inch.
Well,
yes?
It seems like people might want to do we don't know where to find the pixels per inch.
So again, to get the actual resolution of your screen, so come up to the Apple menu, down to System, in your case Settings or Preferences, click on Displays. In my case, I've got, again, I don't know what your settings are, but let me see. Displays right here. No, that's fine, that's fine. Just hover over the word default, right? And somewhere, actually, oh, right there. So yours is 1,728 wide. Got it? So then you would really measure your screen. Yours looks like a 12 inch, maybe 13 inch wide, whatever, and divide into that number, and that's the true value. Okay. Yet another rabbit hole. The rest of these you can actually pretty much leave at their, oh, I take that back. Let's go back down to Enhanced Controls. Technology Previews, this is the one that I want. They've actually moved what I want in Technology's Previews out. So in the old version, or in the very first version of Photoshop that used AI, there was a setting that we actually set in here that no longer is here. So at this stage of the game, you can say okay to your preferences. Now, that's a lot. And you say to yourself, I don't ever want to do that again. So at this stage of the game right now, you want to actually save a copy of your preferences. Because when Photoshop goes all to hell in a month, instead of having to go back in and reset all of these, if you've saved a copy of all of your preferences, you simply load that copy back in and it gives you the version of your Photoshop that's just like this one without being all screwed up. More importantly, if you work on multiple machines, like you're a retoucher and you work on the Office's version and then your version, whatever, you can actually take your preferences and load them on any machine, and all of these settings will be done already for you. And it seems like a whole lot easier to do, right? But the biggest thing here is that, again, if Photoshop starts acting really wonky, and this is something we need to talk about right now, so shit happens that shouldn't be happening, right? You grab a paintbrush and instead you get the lasso tool. You grab the lasso tool and it starts cloning on your image. I mean, weird shit can happen in Photoshop, right? When that happens, your first recourse is to restart Photoshop. If that fixes the problem, great. If it doesn't fix the problem, restart your computer. If that fixes the problem, then great. If that doesn't fix the problem, you need to reset the preferences in Photoshop. I need everybody to do this with me right now. We're not going to reset them, but you need to know how to do this. So at this stage of the game, you need to quit Photoshop. So Photoshop is acting wonky right now, so I'm just going to quit Photoshop. And then there's 2 keyboard shortcuts that you need to know. So the first one is that if you are on Windows, you want to hold down the Alt-Control-Shift. If you're on a Macintosh, you do the Option-Command-Shift, and then keep them held down, and then start Photoshop. So on mine, I'm going to hold down, again, because I'm on a Macintosh, Option, Command, and the Shift key, and then keep them held down and launch Photoshop, and keep holding them down. If you're on Windows, that is Alt-Control-Shift, and you will get this dialog that comes up and says, do you want me to delete Photoshop settings files? Now, this is a bone that I have to pick with people who do UI design. Why the fuck do they call this preferences in Photoshop and settings in the dialog? It's the same damn thing. Can't you call it the same? Well, so anyway, do not hit yes, or it's going to reset all of that work you just did. Hit no, but this is how you would go about doing it. The problem is that if you go through all of your work to set these preferences and you have to do this reset, Photoshop goes back to how it shipped. You lose everything. Don't want to do that. Are we good on this part? We're not finished with preferences yet. We're almost there. So the next thing that we need to do, and it's a preference, I don't know why it's not in preferences. For the Windows people, I think it's in the same place for Windows. It's at the bottom of your edit menu. For all the Macintosh people, it's also at the bottom of your edit menu. So go to edit, down to color settings, or who knows what now they call it, color whatever. Can everybody find that part? Okay, hang on. Edit menu, down to color settings. So take a look at my screen. It's kind of at the bottom. Sure, no. Thanks for just jumping in there. That's exactly what I said. See, you're back on track right now. It took nothing. Color settings. How many people, when they do look at their RGB right here, have something other than Adobe RGB? Photoshop by default ships with sRGB as your color space. We're going to talk about color spaces in a little bit, but basically, if you think of it, it is a volume of color, and they come in different sizes. The more colors that that something can show you, the bigger that volume is. So a monitor can show you a larger color space, or a good monitor anyway, than a shitty printer, right? So we'll talk about color spaces in a bit, but anyway, sRGB is one of the smallest color spaces that you would want to work in. Adobe RGB is, in my estimation, the best color space for you to work in. Some of you will actually have this set up to work in ProPhoto RGB, especially the people who bring stuff in from Lightroom into Photoshop a lot. There's a problem with ProPhoto in my estimation, but I will just say this about it. If you're going to work, so sRGB is a relatively small space, Adobe RGB is a larger space, and then ProPhoto is a considerably larger space. And most people would say, well, you want to use the biggest space you can use to hold all the color, right? The problem with it is that the space is so large, you cannot work in 8-bit. You have to go to 16-bit. Bit depth has to do with the number of data points that can describe anything, that can describe a space. So for instance, in Photoshop, in an 8-bit world, if you've got a grayscale image, you can have 256 tones of gray. If you go to 16-bit, you go up to 65,000 tones of gray. So it's just a greater ability to describe more nuanced space. And if you are working in ProPhoto, it is so big. If you work in 8-bit, the gaps between tones that normally would look like they are next to one another and would give you the illusion of continuous tone go away. And you start seeing spaces in between the tones, and that spacing is banding, pixelation, all the negative shit that happens. So I know people, it's everybody's first experience. They work in ProPhoto in 8-bit and they do their first color correction, and all of a sudden skin tones you start getting like, you know, the lines on like the edge of the Grand Canyon, you see the striation lines, that shit starts to happen in skin. And it's because you don't have enough information to describe. You've pulled the tones too far apart, and so you get these definite delineation lines in between them. So it's just a warning. If you work in 16-bit, you've doubled your file size and you've doubled the time it takes to do anything on that file. So if it takes 5 minutes to run a blur on an 8-bit file, it's going to take 10 to run it on a 16-bit file. The other problem that I have with it is there's not a monitor made that can show you ProPhoto's color space. The best of monitors right now are basically can show you maybe a little bit better than Adobe RGB, but not much. So, make sense? That's going to be my vote. However, if you actually use the custom menu drop down right here, this general purpose 2 is the default, and unfortunately Adobe named something that's so close to it. North American Prepress 2 is what you actually want to pick. The other problem with the default about general purpose 2, I'm going to go back to this is the default, is that it removes all the profile, all the color mismatch warnings here are all removed in this. So by default, you can bring a file into Photoshop, you can convert it to another color space that you don't know has been converted to, and then save that file. That conversion will be embedded, it will be written into your file. That conversion is not, it's undoable. You would have to start all over again to undo that part, whatever, and they don't bother to tell you that that problem exists. Whoever designed this part of UI at Adobe should be shot.
Or get an email or something.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm going to change mine to North American Prepress 2. That will actually enable all these warnings. It'll give me Adobe RGB as my color space. It'll also set up my CMYK color space, which is, this is the most general one in the US. If you're in Europe or Asia, you wouldn't use this one. You would probably, depending on where you are, you would want to know. But if you're in Europe, you would probably work with the Euro scales, and if you're in Asia, you work with the Japanese colors or the focal colors. There's these focal colors. You would work with different color spaces, but for US, for most of what we do, this is at least a good starting point. Yes? That's a really good question, and I think the answer to that really is a lot of it has to do with, this is going to go way back. So before digital, pre-digital, whatever, printing inks. There's stuff that you used to be, again, I don't have any idea now what's happened now, but there was stuff that you could get printed in Japan with inks that were illegal to use here in the US because they're so environmentally toxic. Sebachrome, which was a color process that happened years ago, was actually developed by Ilford, which is a European company. And it's, oh my God, the chemistry for that stuff was so nasty. And people just dumped it down the drain, whatever. And it became illegal in the US. So you could get color in Europe that you couldn't get in the US. And then the same thing happened in Asia. That's why you'll see a lot of people who really print. It's much less worse right now. But there was a whole book that was done of children that were born with really horrible deformities in the 50s in Japan. And it was all because of the printing and what the printing industry had done to the water that surrounded Japan. So, I mean, it was huge. So that's why. And then it's become standard. You know, their presses are set up different than, I don't know, whatever inks that they can get. That would be my guess. Yes?
Can you typically the ProPhoto in this case? High-end printing, or what if the monitors can't match, or what?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
The peripheral space, if it exceeds what monitors can achieve, is it high-end printing?
Hold that thought, because when we get into the color election part, that's actually going to come up. But the second it comes up, remind me of that question, because then we can look at it. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead at this stage of the game and say okay to this. So now you can actually save your preferences. So for the Macintosh people, again, if you go back to our Canvas page, and go to our session 1 resources. Oh, by the way, really quickly, these buttons right down here, you can actually work this on your phone. These buttons down here are dynamic. So if you want to get to a session really fast, when you get here, you can click on all of these and it'll take you immediately to that session. But we'll go to session 1. And inside the resources right here, I think it's going to be session 1 resources. It might be in course resources. Nope, it's right here. Photoshop preference locations. If you click on this, this will tell you where they are for both Windows and for Macintosh. So in Macintosh, what we're really looking for here, it would be this general settings. What you're looking for is your user partition, the library, but this is your user library, which most of you haven't made visible yet, but you're going to in a second. Preferences, Adobe Photoshop, and then settings. We are not going to go, this is the settings file, we're going to grab the entire folder. So this is for Macintosh right here. For the Windows people, keep scrolling down. And in the second version down here for Windows people, it's actually in here. Nope, that's still preset locations. Yeah, Windows preference locations. So for the Windows people, you need to go to this path right here. For the Macintosh people, you need to follow me. So go back to your Finder. I'm going to close up this Connect to Server. I'm going to hide everybody else really quickly. Guys, we're going to get through this and take a break. So to get to Macintosh preferences, the thing that you need to save, you need to get to your user library. Now, unfortunately, in the Macintosh world, there are 3 different libraries. So if you click on just your Macintosh HD, the boot drive itself, there's a library right here. This is for system-wide. This is not your user library. If you click on the system folder, there's another library here. This is the system library, not the user one. If you click on users, it doesn't give you any help at all. The way you get to the library that you need to get to is you go up to your Go menu and you click. Depending on the Macintosh you have, you will see there's no library listed here. If you hold down the Shift key, one thing on certain computers, library will show up. If not, hold down your Option key, and in that case, in my computer, library showed up. You want to come down here and click on library. So again, the Go menu, hold down either Shift or Option. It depends on your computer. Either Shift or Option, you will see the library. Go ahead and open the library. And when you open this, if you hover over the word that says library at the very top, you'll see that you get a little, it looks like a little folder. You can grab that folder and drag it over to your favorites on your window and let go, and then you won't have to remember that keyboard shortcut anymore. Mine's actually already in here, so all I need to do is click on it and it'll actually show me the library that up until now is hidden from you. Apple does not trust you. We just gave them the finger. Once we do that, you need to follow where it is, so come down to the Preference folder. So slide down to Preferences. So up to the Go menu. You'll see I have no library here. Hold down either Shift or Option. In my case, it's Option, and the library shows up. Click on Library. This is now showing me my library. This is what the window is. If you don't want to remember that, hover over the word library up at the very top. You will get the little icon. Click and drag that over to your favorites and just let go. And now, no matter where you are, I'm going to go to my application folder right now. You can click on the library and you'll be right there. scroll down to the preference folder, not preference pane, but preference folder, and then you will find that in here you've got Adobe Photoshop settings. They are specific to the one that you're using. You'll see I've got settings for Photoshop 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. You should be working on 2024. You want to grab this entire folder. It used to be that all you had to do was go in and grab the preference file that was inside here. That is no longer the case. You need to grab the entire folder, click on this and drag it out to your desktop, but do not let go. Let me get mine to move. They may have this shut off on your. They may have it shut off on your computer that you don't get that window. But let's take a look. When did they do that? Oh yeah, so you got your favorites here. So come over, hover over both. Already grab that and drag it right over your favorites, and just let go.
Oh, I see.
There, you're right. It's all right. It's all right.
First, before you go back, can you look at this? The preferences seem to not be the same as your preferences.
You want to grab the whole show. So it's this whole folder here. That whole folder. So, hang on, I'll be right there. I'll be right there. So when you grab this is important, because if you grab this and just drag this to your desktop, it will move it. You don't want to move it. You want to make a copy of this. Come on. So get out to your desktop, hold down your Option key, and you will see you get a little plus symbol. And then when you let go, it will actually make a copy of that on your desktop and leave the original where it's supposed to be. Right there. So it's the entire settings folder, the entire folder that you got when you copy it to your desktop. It's now going to be copy of it. So then, if Photoshop goes shitty on you, you simply come into this very same place and take that preference folder that you saved and put it back in there, and all of those things that we just made are restored. Whatever fucked up is undone. It's just a way to reset it. It's a much, much, much better way to do it. Yes, yeah. If you're working on like a really old version of Photoshop, and if there's a reason other than that, Photoshop is the one thing I actually do upgrade pretty consistently.
Where did you find this Photoshop folder?
So in the library that you just saved, click on the library and the favorites, and go down to preferences, or find preferences in here. No, preferences. Double click on it to open that folder. And then inside there's going to be a folder that says Adobe Photoshop settings. And again,
The
that's
2024 one?
yeah, exactly.
Prof, speaking
Yeah.
of which, I have one question.
Shoot.
So, like, for the version of Photoshop we're going to use, you want us to use 2024, right?
No, you can use any version that you want. It's just because we're not going to get to the point. There's very little AI stuff that we do here. So if you're using 2023, it's not going to matter.
I'll just keep using the better ones.
Yeah. Okay. Are there questions about this? Yes. Tell me about it. Okay. I have got 4:04 right now. We are going to do a quick hard 10 back at 4:15, and we're going to try to get through the rest of this. Yep. Okay, so we've got our preferences set correctly. We've actually then saved a copy of those, tucked that away someplace safe and sound. You could put it on a thumb drive and take it with you anywhere and just drop it into that same folder, relative folder, and you would have all of your preferences set the way you actually want them to be set. So the next thing we're going to do, and the last thing we're probably going to get at, I would love to get into a little bit of color. I'm not sure we're going to have time, but I want to go ahead and make this retouching workspace. Most of you, well, is anybody in here using custom workspace for Photoshop? Okay, so there's a couple of people possibly, right? But most of you guys typically go into Photoshop and you get the default space that Photoshop has. And it's okay. Even if you set up the photo one, it's okay, whatever. But the advantage, this has got a lot of advantages to it, and it's things that a lot of people don't ever use, like for instance the info palette, possibly one of the most important things to use in Photoshop, and it's always there for you to open it up, but if you have it visible and you can actually check things right away, it just makes a whole lot of difference. Having channels visible to you and seeing what's really going on there is also a really important, critical thing to have. Obviously your layers are important to have. And then your properties, all these, so these things are important to have. But anyway, so I'm going to show you how to build this workspace. Again, the only thing I will say about this is you can use any workspace in the world. The fact that I'm going to show you how to build this, and what you will possibly, one of the compelling reasons to do this is that all of the recordings that you see, all the lectures, whatever, are going to use this workspace. This is what you're going to be looking at. But again, I can't tell you how nice it is to have maximum image size that doesn't actually slide underneath palettes or windows and you lose things, and all of that stuff begins to go away. So anyway, we're going to build this workspace. If you, like I said, if you don't want to use it, that's up to you. All right, so I'm going to go back to what Photoshop typically ships to get back to a default. If you've got any other workspace that you want to sort of start and go through this same process with me, simply come up to the window menu at the very top, click on this and come down to workspace, and you will see that there's a set of possible already canned ones that are built in. I love the fact that they've still got a 3D workspace when Photoshop got rid of 3D in version 2021. That was 3 or 4 years ago, but they still give you a workspace to work in that. Clever. But if you're doing photography, you could pick this one. I'm going to actually say what most of you guys are using is the Essential Default one. So if you've got a different workspace, go ahead and click on Essential Default. It will actually return Photoshop to look somewhat like it does when it ships. However, changing workspaces is always a two-step process. So this is not complete yet to get me back exactly the way it's supposed to be. You need to go right back to that very same space, up to the window menu, down to workspace, and then come down to reset essentials. Now, the word essentials will change. If I had gone from my essentials workspace to say painting, this would say reset painting. Or if I'd gone to photography, this would say reset photography. So at any rate, I'm going to do reset essentials here. And this is basically where most of you guys should be starting from. Now, Windows people, this has always been yes. So go right back up to the window menu, back to workspaces, and it's just the lower part. See it? Yeah. Okay. Windows people have actually always had this. This was actually a function of Windows. One of the few things that the Mac team at Adobe probably stole and put it into the Mac version. If you come up to your window menu again, before we do anything more, I want to come down and make sure that everybody has got application frame checked. If you don't have it checked, what ends up happening is that you actually can see through. I just see what I'm looking at now is actually my video recording program. It's looking through. You can see I've still got Photoshop going on up at the top left, but I've lost that sort of like background. I not only have lost the background, but all of my tool palettes here. I'm going to hide everybody else, so this is a little less confusing. But all of my tool palettes, right, none of this is connected. So if I move this around, my palettes are not necessarily going to move it with it. So go back up to Windows and come down, make sure application frame is enabled. And now what you'll see is if you come up and you grab the window up near the word that says Adobe Photoshop up near the top, if you click and move this around, like I'm just going to click and drag mine down like this, whatever, it moves everything. Everything still stays connected. It moved all the palettes with it. If you double click on this space, it will zoom back up to be as large as it can be and still show you your full workspace with nothing hidden. We didn't lose any of our layers. We didn't lose anything here. If you do this same move, let's say I take this, let's say I've got an external monitor connected and I actually move this from my laptop to a 32-inch external monitor and do that same double click action, it will fill that. It's dynamic. So it just makes all of this easier than trying to go in here and screw with the spacing and get it, anyway. So the first thing I'm going to do, and you pretty much have to start this way. The reason I'm starting this way is there are things that are already anchored. Once we lose an anchoring, it gets really hard to reconnect an anchor to the frame itself. So I'm going to go through a bunch of steps that are going to seem possibly unnecessary, but it's all because I don't want to ever lose my anchor to the frame. So the first thing I'm going to do is, you'll see there's two little thumbnails that are on the top right hand side. If you click on one, it's history when it opens up. You want to click on the word history, the tab, click and drag it off, and it will actually bring it completely out. You can then do the same thing with comments. You can click and drag it out as well. I'm not using comments in this. Yes. Yeah, so in here, you basically just click on the file. You need something to do with the network. This is why.
You're done. You're cut. That's enough for me. You're cut.
Okay, so we don't need comments. So the little X that's on the top left-hand corner, click on it and get rid of it. We're going to come back now up into color swatches, gradients, and patterns. We don't need any of this stuff. But again, this is anchored to the frame, and I don't want to lose that. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on Patterns tab, tear it off, bring it out onto my workspace, and click on the X to get rid of it. I'm going to do the same thing with gradients, tear it off, click on the X to get rid of it. I'm going to do the same thing with swatches, click on the X to get rid of it. But at this stage of the game, I'm going to stop because I've got colors still anchored to my frame. I'm going to move properties up to this color tab. So click on the properties tab. Watch my screen when I do this. I'm going to drag properties off, and then I'm going to bring it back on, and you see where it gets this blue border that goes all the way around it? That's your signal that this is actually going to be become a tab along with color. So I'm going to let go of that. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to do that one. Again, if you get stuck, stop me. I'm going to again then grab color and tear color off and get rid of it. The reason we went through all of that was to make sure that properties is anchored to the frame. So the next thing I'm going to do is click on library, and I'm going to move library up to properties. Now, I don't use libraries a ton, but when you want to use them, you want to have them there. And it's no problem to have it in the background. So once you drag it up and put it along with properties, make sure that you select properties to be the visible tab, because when we save this workspace, whatever is the dominant tab will actually get saved. And so this is what your screen will ultimately look like. So how many people in here use adjustments? There's been a change in Photoshop, and the adjustments now has got a set of presets that exist in here, but it also has all the old school stuff, the levels, the color balance, the black and white. It's got all of that kind of stuff in here. I do not use adjustments. Everything that is in adjustments already exists in the layers palette except for these presets. So if you want the presets, you can get this back, but I'm going to suggest right now that we get rid of this. However, I want to make sure that my layers is connected to my properties. So I'm going to grab my layers palette and drag it up so that it connects and becomes another tab with my adjustments. And then I'm going to grab my adjustments and tear it off and get rid of it. Now the reason I'm doing that, and you don't do this right now, I'm just going to show you. You need a file open to do this, so I'm just going to create a quick synthetic file to do this. If you look at your layers palette, at the bottom there's a series of icons at the bottom of the palette. There's a circle that's got half black and half white. If you click on that, you will get a flyout menu that has all of your adjustments. Why on earth would you take up your screen real estate with this giant palette called adjustments when all of it's sitting right here? It's a little bitty icon as opposed to this giant ass. Anyway, paths, I'm going to then click and drag path up and make it a tab along with layers and let go. And then finally channels, I'm going to click and tear off. So now what you should see on the side of this, on your right side over here, is that you have properties up at the top. I've got paths and layers. You want to click on layers to make it the dominant tab, because when we save this, we work with layers more than we do with paths. If you feel like you need more space to actually see, you need a little less in your properties, a little more of your layers, if you hover your cursor right between where those two meet, so where Properties tab meets the layers grouping right here, you'll get a double-headed arrow. You can click and raise this up or down. In my case, I'm going to raise it up a little bit. This will get saved, but you can also always resize this. If you feel like you're using rulers and grids, and you want to see that information all the time, whatever, you can adjust this after the fact. But this side is actually where I need it right now. The other side is not. I'm going to get rid of this synthetic file because I don't need this. What I do want to do is add to the very top here my info palette. So come up to the Windows menu. And for all of those who threw away adjustments and said, oh my God, I really like those presets, I need them back. Adjustments is sitting right here. You could come down to Window, pick Adjustments. It will open it up again for right where you left it when you closed it up, whatever, and you now got all your presets that you could go after. I'm going to close it up right now because I don't need it right now. And then I am going to add something though. I'm going to go up to the window menu and come down to Info. So again, up to your window menu, down to Info. It'll open up the info palette. It docks it as a thumbnail icon against properties. We're not going to leave it there. Click on the Info tab, drag it off. And now we're going to take this and bring it all the way over to the toolbar. We need to dock it with the toolbar. So drag the Info tab, get close to the toolbar, and when you see the solid blue line that goes all the way up and down, let go. Because that is now docking it to the toolbar. The problem that I have with this though is that when I did this entire thing becomes my info palette, because you can get you can use color sampler points to give you an enormous amount of information. I don't need that part right here. What I am going to do is I'm going to add history over to go right underneath this. And the thing is, you would think that you would take history and you would drop it somewhere down underneath here. It doesn't work that way. Don't ask me why. If you look at the info palette, you'll see that there's a solid blue, there's a blue line that's right underneath it. Not the top one, not either of these top two, but the one that's closer into the middle. You want to bring your history tab right underneath that. When you get the solid blue line, let go. And what you'll see now is that history is now occupying the entire lower part of this palette group that's on the left-hand side. And then finally, channels, we are going to put underneath history. In this case, you actually do drag it down to the bottom and tuck it underneath, bring it all the way down, and you will actually see it turns into a blue solid line there, and let go. Now in my case, I've got a lot of history showing and not a lot of channels, so I want to hover over again where the channels palette meets the history palette. Hover just right in the middle there, you'll get the double-headed arrow. Click and drag up, and this will give us enough room to see our history and our channels. We're almost done. There's one last thing we need to add here, and that's actions. So come up to your window menu and come down to actions. You'll see that you get actions and comments together. Tear them apart, get rid of comments, and then bring your actions tab on top of your history palette. Make sure that the entire blue thing shows up. Let go. This has now got Actions as our primary tab. We want History to be our primary tab instead. This is your retouching workspace. So to use this, to save this, which is what we want to do, come up to your window menu, down to Workspace, and then come down to New Workspace, and you can name it something clever like Retouching.
And Prof, that's we must set up for this class, right?
No, you do not. You can work with any workspace that you want to work with.
What is the new workspace?
So again, if you come up to the Windows menu,
Oh, found it.
down to Workspace, down to New Workspace, and type it in and call it Retouching. Mine's called Retouching 29 because I've done so many of these, it's ridiculous. I'm not going to save number 30 here. So anyway, just save it. So then, you don't have to change any of those. So now you've actually got your workspace made, but just like your preferences, it would be great if you could save that so that you don't have to build this again ever. To do that, for the Macintosh people, you go to the preference folder in the library again, just where your settings were. For the Windows people, I think it's in the same spot, but there's the PDF on our Session 1 resources for the Windows people. It will tell you exactly where your workspaces are being saved. I'm going to go here to my preferences, and inside of preferences, if you actually, it may not be in preferences. No, hang on one second. It's still in your library folder, but I think this is going to be in application support. Don't go there yet. Let me just make sure. I could actually go to our website and find it, but yeah, let me just go to our website. So for the Macintosh people, custom workspaces, is this obscene or what? Look at it. I mean, Adobe puts this shit all over your computer. This is just madness. What are the chances that it's going to just be called Workspace? Yep, right here. So, library preferences. Oh, so it's in the settings folder. So it's actually inside the folder that you just saved. Back to the preference folder. So back to preferences, not application support, but preferences. PRE. Oops. Preferences. To Adobe, to your Adobe, whatever your version is, settings. And then go down to the very bottom of settings, and there's two folders down there. There is workspaces, and then there's modified workspaces, and you would think that yours would be in the modified workspace folder, but it is not. It's actually in the folder just called workspaces. Again, don't drag this out of this folder without holding down the Option key. You want to make a copy of this to your desktop. So again, I would click and drag out and hold down the Option key to make a copy, because you want to leave a version of this in this workspace folder, otherwise you'll lose it in Photoshop. Everybody good on this part?
Just copy paste it.
You could try. Go for it. Tell me if it works. Okay, perfect. You can copy and paste. Okay. Any questions about this part so far? Yes?
So when I go into workspaces,
Then you didn't save your workspace yet.
but when I go into I can change workspace to like 3D and then I switch it back to the other one because it's saved on there.
Then which version of Photoshop are you working in, and which settings folder are you looking in your preferences? Because if you have more than one version of Photoshop, you could be looking in the wrong settings.
They're both in
At 2024 and it's not showing up there? I completely believe that. I've got a copy of this. So for anybody who this didn't work for, I've got a copy of this, my version of this, that I will give to you. we should take a look at this. So maybe after class, let's take a look. Who knows? Again, this is the same exact shitty, weird behavior that I would say, okay, well, that sounds like a system reset, preference reset to me. But anyway, okay. Whew. We've gone through a lot. There's more. Really quickly, it's the last thing I'm going to leave you guys with right here. I need everybody to go. Everybody got a copy of the assignment folders complete, right? We're actually going to open a file in Photoshop and do something with it. So, no, right? So, let me get to where I'm going to get to. So, go to your session 1 folders. I'm going to go to my class number 1. Inside that, there should be a thing that says redcar.psd. Can everybody find that? If you just double click on that, it should launch this up into Photoshop, and it's a picture of a red Corvette. It's called Red Car.
Session 1 folder, is that like
It's in the assignments folder that you copied. So the assignment's complete, the thing that we spent all that time trying to copy. It's where all your assignments are. Hopefully it's on your desktop. It's right here. Double click on that. It's in here. Session 1. Perfect. Red car. Sure. Just double click on it. Okay, so what did I mean about this? Actually, well, you don't ever have to worry about this part. So session 1 in the assignment folder, there should be a file in there called Red Car.
In the folder that the
If you don't have it, I can give it to you really quick on this drive. I'm sorry?
I'm mumbling. That's a bit of shit over
So I just put in a hard drive that has that exact folder, the assignments complete on it. Put it in that. Yep. Red car. Right? That's all right, don't worry. Okay, so we've got Red Car open. This is how we'll wind up. We'll finish this whole part up right here. So, if you come over to your tool palette and you look sort of down to the bottom third of it or the bottom quarter of it, whatever, you'll see a little hand and a little magnifying glass. If you double click on the magnifying glass, it will take your screen to 100%. You'll see there's a 100% setting right here. If you double click on the hand, it will make your image as large as it can be without losing any of your image underneath any of these palettes. You can actually click on this car and drag it on top of one of your palettes, but if you double click on the hand again, it will reset this so that it sits inside of your palettes and respects that. So it's a quick way to uncover this if you ever need to actually uncover it. I don't use tons of keyboard shortcuts in this class. I don't use a lot of them in my life, but I do use, there are some that I do use, and I will never quiz you on keyboard shortcuts. If you can do it with a menu, fine, do it with a menu. I don't care, that's not my job, whatever. This is other things here, the more. But there's some that I actually do use religiously. I will tell them to you as I go along, but you can do it whatever way you want to. If you hover over your cursor right now, over your image, I've got the hand, but if you hold down your space bar and the command key, again, every time for the Windows people I say command, I think it's command is for, it's command control. I think it's Command Control, or the two that switch in Macintosh.
Control and Alt.
So it's Control and Alt.
Those-
What's Command then? So it's Command and Option then?
And no, we also have Alt.
You're right, the command is control and option.
Okay, sure. So if you heard that, just realize that when I say that, because I'm not going to bother to do that every time, whatever, you'll see that no matter what tool you have, it turns into the magnifying glass. If you add the Option key, it turns into the negative magnifying glass. So this is a quick way to get your images to get it bigger or smaller. And again, once I got mine back to 100%, if I double click on the hand, it kicks it all the way back open again. So we have got 10 minutes left in this class, and I'm going to see how really good all of those threes are out here. And I'm going to time you for this. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. So let me set up my timer here really quickly, and I'll tell you what I want you to do. Don't worry, you're not graded on this. I probably won't even see most of them. I give you two minutes to turn the car green. Go. Turn the car green. Twenty seconds left. Time's up. So how'd you do? And how did you do it? That's really beautiful, but that's not good. You got a good selection. Reasonably good hue saturation, right? Yeah, it's not most people actually do it. Same thing, hue saturation. Yeah, it's pretty good. You guys have this weird idea of what green really is. Yeah, no hue saturation. So did anybody do this any other way with the hue saturation? How did you do it?
I created a selection of the subject, and then I created all the way into it, and then I went to adjustments, or image adjustments, and I went to replace color.
Oh,
And then I turned it all the way up to
interesting. Can I see? I've never heard this one before. Interesting. It looks very similar to doing hue saturation. So how did you do it? Oh, another interesting one, kind of the same variation on the same theme. Okay, somebody needs to whip out a timer and time me. Sure. That wasn't you. Stop. If I wasn't using a trackpad, it would be much easier.
That's nonsense.
Oh, it does. So I would throw a layer mask on here, but done, right? So why do I bother to show this to you guys here at all, right? So the reason I show this to you is that this is, well here, no, let's actually redo this all together. So everybody, if you want to go back to how your image was when you first opened it, go over to your history palette, scroll to the very top of your history palette, and either click on the thing that says redcar.psd or click on the thing that says open, either one. It will do the same thing. Oh, by the way, while you're here, a couple things that we need to set up. Oh, this would be perfect. A couple things that we need to set up while you're here. I forgot to tell you about this part. So anyway, while we're here, in your history palette, there are, somebody calls this a hamburger. I mean, I get the sort of the layered thing, whatever. So regardless, look at the hamburger that's across. Make sure you got the history tab selected. Click on that little hamburger part and come down to history options. You want to make sure that the top one will actually be already checked, but you want to make sure that you also check automatically create new snapshot when saving, and also show new snapshot dialog by default. You want to make sure those are all checked. Say okay to that. While we're here, go down to the hamburger for the channels palette, come down to panel options, click on the radio button next to the largest thumbnail. You'd be shocked at the information that you can get from large thumbnails. Say okay to that. Do the same thing for layers. Over to the layers palette, click on the hamburger, come down to panel options, click on the thumbnail next to the largest of the icons, and then finally the same thing in the path palette. Click on the path palette down to path options, and click on the thumbnail, the radio button next to the largest of the thumbnail. Go back to layers here, and so this is what I did in this. So the first thing is up to the, so this is where we're heading. I don't expect you guys to be here. This is getting into really advanced color correction, which we get into much later in the semester. But just to give you the tease, and the reason I'm giving you this tease right now is so that you come back next week and suffer through the lecture on color theory. So, up to the image menu, down to mode, we are going to change this from an RGB image to an LAB image. We will talk about what LAB color is next week. But basically, the advantage of LAB is that you separate color from luminosity. So once we've done that, if you look at your channels palette now, it reflects, instead of having RGB here, it has LAB values. If you click on the lightness channel, you'll see a black and white version of your image. That is the luminosity of the image. If you click on the what's labeled as the A channel here, this is the A axis. Basically, this represents the greens and the reds, the difference in those two, the complementary colors. If we think about the color wheel, the complementary versions of that. Some people will call it green magenta, some people call it green red. One of the reasons that we spend so much time in color is we try to get away from those labels. Green, what the fuck is green? Anyway, if you click on the B channel, this is the blue-yellow axis of it. So what I have done is, I'm going to go back, click on the LAB channel at the very top to get back to your normal image. I actually added a curve on this, and again, to get to your curve, to your adjustment layers, it's the icon at the very bottom of your layers palette that's half a circle, that's half black, half white. Click on that and come up to curve, and you will now notice in your drop-down menu that we don't have RGB values in channels anymore. We have lightness, A and B. I don't want to touch lightness. I want to keep the lightness unchanged. That's one of the advantages of doing color correction in LAB, is that you don't change the luminosity. That's not something you can do in RGB. When you're in RGB, if you change a red value or a green value or a blue value, you not only change the color, but you change its brightness, you change its luminosity. That is, other than using blending modes to restrict that, there's no way to avoid that. That is not a problem in LAB. So I'm going to come down to the A channel for LAB. Again, this is the green, magenta, or green-red axis. And I'm simply going to invert it. I'm going to grab the point at the very bottom, what would be the 0, 0 point in RGB. I'm going to click and drag it all the way up to the top, and then I'm going to go over to the white point, which would basically be 255, 255, 255. Click and drag it all the way back down. What I've done then is inverted that color, that specific color aspect. And so what was green has now become, what was red has now become green. What's green has now become red. They've flipped. So that's why you'll actually take a look in the, you'll see the bricks in the building in the back. They also got changed. But anything in here that had a relatively neutral color is unaffected. Because that's only luminosity. That doesn't have color. The white of the tires, there's no color in that. There's very little color in the shadows of the pavement. There's no color in the chrome.
So you would just have to paint off like the grass and the road?
Yeah, I would just make a quick selection of it. But this is, this whole first 2 weeks, 3 weeks is going to be all about selections. Yes.
Wait, how did you know that the A channel was to the
Color theory. You're going to see it next week. Yeah, because I'm gone over 1 minute and we got to end this right now. So the last thing I will leave you guys with is this. I know this is a lot. Next week we'll get a little bit better because we'll actually work on files a little bit of next week. I know this is, you're just like, I did not sign up for this. I did not. He's talking about invisible scratch disk. What the fuck is this all about? And building workspaces I don't need. Color channels, what's that? Blah, 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 blah. Stick with me. I will get you through this. Hopefully you've heard enough rumors about this class to at least stick with it for a couple of weeks. I'll see you guys next week.
This is exactly what I did. Your hard drive back?
Please.